the Stoughton Area School District Board of Education. Ms. Egan, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Coughlin?
Here.
Mr. Fry?
Here.
Ms. Fitzgibbon?
Here.
Ms. Hoppy? Here. Mr. Jackson?
Here.
Ms. Patterson?
Here.
Ms. Sorg?
Here.
Mr. Murphy?
Here.
Mr. Boban is excused. President Sullivan?
Here. Thank you. Next, we would invite any members of the public who wish to address the board to come forward to the lectern at this time. We ask people to speak for somewhere in the range of 3 minutes. We're not real crazy about keeping track, so if you go a little bit over, you're welcome. Would anyone like to come and speak? Yes. Two things that you probably want to get closer to the microphone rather than further away. And if you would start by telling us your name and address, please.
My name is Ava Kempinen, and I live on 2599 Leslie Road by the town hall.
Thank you.
I am a trainer at the Dunkin' Donuts, and we have a student promotional for 10% off in the mornings and 20% off on Mondays and Wednesdays after school. And I just wanted to ask permission to hang flyers around the high school to advertise those promotions.
All right. That is something that I think Dr. Onsager will take up with you on the side.
Okay.
We do not respond to public comment because we end up discussing things that are not on the agenda, which is extremely badly behaved to us.
Okay.
But Dr. Onsager will touch base with you offline and work through your request.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for bringing more donuts to our
Coffee.
And coffee, yes. You can never have too much coffee. Would anyone else like to address the board? Seeing no one coming forward, we will not have legislative update tonight because Mr. Boban is not here. Next on the agenda is the district administrator's report. Dr. Onsager.
Thanks. Couple things. First of all, we had our staff appreciation tailgate last Friday. We had over 200 staff members who came and enjoyed the festivities. Great food, catered to us by Sugar and Spice. The band popped by to play for the tailgate. I want to thank Yoli for helping to serve, and Frank and Joe for being there to support as well. And it was a great time by all. And so that was our third annual, and so we look to do it again next year. It's become a great tradition and a great way for staff to kick off the year. And then at halftime, we invited all staff who were there to walk out onto the track so that we could recognize staff by the community and by the students. So it was a great evening. Game was a little closer than I hoped for, but we squeaked out a victory. The week of September 24th, so not next week, or not this week, but the week after, so next week, is homecoming. And so it'll be a day of or a week of festivities, which culminates on Friday with the homecoming parade, which starts at 4:15 from the high school. Immediately following the homecoming parade is a community tailgate where numerous organizations are there, either selling or giving away things. It's a great atmosphere. The band boosters provide food, etc. On behalf of the board and the district, I have 600 glow necklaces that we hand out to students and anybody who's interested. So if anybody would like to work with me and hand out glow necklaces on September 28th, which is the Friday, we will start probably about 4:30, 4:45-ish, and we will have a table, and we have 600 glow necklaces to hand out to kids and, you know,
School board members.
School board members. They're purple, and so we usually have a great time. So if anybody's interested, feel free to stop by. Next thing I had is I have a video that we are going to be pushing out to YouTube starting tomorrow, which highlights our youth apprenticeship program that I thought I'd show you before we push it up. Where's our volume?
think genetics interests me a lot just because it's such a big part of our daily life, and although we don't always realize it, they're in everything. I would have never thought about genetics and carrots, but now that's what I work with every single day. I am in a youth apprenticeship program. It's half a class that's at the BTCI in Pittsburgh, and then the other half is that I have a job here at UW-Madison. I work in the horticulture department. I currently work in the carrot genetics research lab. When I first heard about the program, the youth apprenticeship program, was from my counselor when I was asking her about just getting some early ideas about college. And when I heard about it, it just sounded like such a cool experience to be able to work in a lab in high school with college students and real professionals all the time, and be able to have a lot better of a classroom experience before attending college and being able to have that step up. I'm studying under Dr. Philip Simon, and Dr. Simon is the world's leading expert in carrots, so he's a very fun man to learn under and has a lot of really good insight on any question I have about carrots or genetics itself. I've spent a lot of time working with the undergrads on helping with little projects around the lab. One of the big things has been seed germination. That's checking to see how the seeds grow. I've also done some tissue culture. I spend a lot of days in the field. We have a field up in Hancock at the USDA Agricultural Center in Hancock, and grow all of our carrots for testing. And then we have a field in West Madison here, kind of by the mall, where we do seed productions. I think the most interesting part of working here during the school year in the summer is just getting more lab experience and really understanding what it would be like to work in the lab as a career, and also just learning about the different kinds of genetics. I didn't think about plant genetics before, but now it's opened my eyes to the different fields I can go into as my career. It's such an interesting field, and I've liked it since middle school and haven't stopped.
So that's just another opportunity we provide to our students. As she said, this young lady gets the opportunity to work in the lab at Madison with one of the leading experts in carrot genetics, right alongside undergrads. And so she's a junior, senior in high school working in a lab at UW-Madison. So thought I'd share that one with you.
Cool. Any questions or discussion?
That's fantastic. Where are you posting this?
We have our own YouTube channel.
Will it be on the Facebook, posted to the Facebook page too?
We can, yes. And then, right. And then Friday I shared a couple other videos with you in my update from Kaganza and Sandhill.
Next on the agenda is the consent agenda.
And it's only one page, which could be sad. I move approval of the September 4th, 2018 regular board meeting minutes. I move approval of the August 30th, October 9th, 2018 check register and September 5th, 2018 P-card statement as presented. We would like to say thank you to the following individuals and groups and move approval of their donations to the district. $1,500 from Wisconsin Health and Physical Education Incorporated for River Bluff Physical Education snowshoes. $256.50 from Rotary Club of Stoughton for meal account for exchange student. No monetary donation valued at $3,198.48 from the Douglas Stewart Company for school supply for district students. Another non-monetary donation valued at $247.03 from Joe and Carol Kubali for school supply for students that need assistance. Also, valued at $150 school supply for district students from Zell Chiropractic Center SC. $100 in school supply for district students from Expo Logistics. $55 in classroom consumables at Ten Hill from Kicks Unlimited. $50 value for art easel from Gordon Smith. $30 value for supplies and backpack for students in need from Jean and Dan Pure. And related cash donation budget adjustment for $1,756.50. I move approval of a temporary professional educator contract for Ethan Zick for the 2018-19 school year. I also move to approve the high school extended and international field trip request to Greven, Germany, Munich, Berlin, and Cologne to participate in a GAPP exchange with sister school on from June 11th to July 2nd, 2018.
The consent agenda has been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Sword. Is there any discussion? Joey?
Well, maybe there will be something, I think, in the agenda, something about the trip to Germany. A little bit more.
So the trip to Germany is, we participate in the GAP program. It's the German-American Partnership Program. And we've been doing this for 10 years, I think it is. What happens is we have a sister school in Greven, Germany. And so it's a great experience and a great opportunity where our students will go over there in June and July. We'll spend that time with they'll stay at the house of another student, go to school with them, they do some cultural things, they go on, as you can see, Munich, Berlin, a few other exchanges. It's a great time. It's a great time for them to immerse themselves in the German language, to the German culture, to see what school is like in Germany. And then what makes it great is then the following fall, those same students host their counterpart from Germany for 2 weeks, and the German students come to school here and experience what it's like in our culture, immerse themselves in full English in our culture, see what school is like, and go on some cultural trips as well.
Yeah, I think it's great. I didn't know that it's been going on for so many
Yes.
years. That's awesome. Thanks.
Joe?
Tim, can you talk about why the oral teacher is a temporary contract?
Because we felt that at how late a date it was that we posted, and that getting that out there, that we hired this person as a temporary teacher, which gives us the option to go out and repost it next spring if we want to. If this person is phenomenal, but when you usually get that late a date right near the start of school, we usually like to do it as a temporary, just so, because you usually don't get that large of a pool of candidates that late in the day.
Okay, that makes sense, because the other music teachers we didn't do.
Correct. So it has nothing to do with, I heard rumors that we're looking to get rid of the program and things like that. There's
wanted to hear
nothing,
that
right,
as well.
there is nothing farther from the truth.
Good. Thank you.
Consent agenda's been moved and seconded. Discussion having closed. All in favor of approving the consent agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The consent agenda is approved. Next on the agenda is our committee reports. Allison?
Finance Committee met tonight. We reviewed the budgets for the last 2 months, since we meet every other month. And then we also reviewed our, if we felt that this was working, meeting every other month, and we feel that right now it's working and it gives us the flexibility to add another meeting if we feel there's something we need to discuss. And then probably the majority of our time we spent planning the annual meeting for October 22nd. And that is where we strongly encourage the community and everyone to come. It's your opportunity to vote on and learn a little bit about how we, what we do with the money that comes in and why our funding is the way it is. It's a really good explanation of what's going on. We encourage the community to come and participate in that. And we basically just kind of hammered out some of the details. We don't have a lot of the information just yet because we don't have the third Friday count. And we're still waiting on, we're still waiting on state aid and property values. Thank you. I knew it was related to money, but not necessarily money in our bank. All right.
Any questions? Joe?
Yeah, ERC met recently, mostly in preparation for bargaining, which has been scheduled for October 15th. You were there, does that sound largely accurate?
It's succinct. And accurate, yes.
Feel free to elaborate.
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Does anyone have questions or comments? John, y'all haven't met since the last meeting.
The ad hoc committee has not met. We do meet on Monday night, at 7 o'clock here.
That meeting is at 7 o'clock here and the public is invited?
Yeah, invited and encouraged because it's a small enough meeting right now and an open enough discussion that anybody who shows up is probably still likely to be able to openly participate in the meeting. So,
What time?
7 o'clock.
So a couple of meetings ago, some of us just showed up unannounced. Is that?
Yeah, please do.
Got invited?
Please do. Yeah, it's
I later felt awkward that we didn't say we were coming.
Yeah.
We'll,
I'm pretty sure the invitation goes out to everybody.
One of the things that we'll make sure we do is we'll make sure we put on the bottom of our posting that a quorum of the board may be present,
Oh,
but no
yeah.
official action will be taken so that we don't have any perception that we're violating open meeting laws.
Do we have that on all of our notices?
No, we don't. It's something that we may want to, right. We have a general posting that says that at different events, like sporting events or plays or musicals, there may be a quorum of the board present. Graduation is a prime example. So we have a generic one that's kind of broad for those events, but it may not be a bad idea to put that on the bottom of our committee meetings, that no official board action will be taken. It's a committee, and everything usually that comes through, everything that goes through committee usually comes back here.
If we could add that, that would be very nice. Facilities has not met, is that correct?
Nope, October 9th.
And then policy has not met. Were you
Yep.
able to meet?
Policy met before the last meeting.
Right.
And there's a policy on the agenda tonight to talk about, which is the camera or electronic surveillance. That was the first one that policy went through with the Neola template. And then we, as an administrative team, met with Scott Brown today to start mapping out some of the policy work that has to be done, with the goal that at the next policy meeting we'll be bringing some policies forward for the policy committee to discuss under the Neola format. It's a mouthful.
I know that you and Tim Boubon had planned to start
Yep.
meeting weekly. Have you done that?
We didn't get a chance to meet this week, but we will be meeting next week.
Tim, has Mr. Boubon designated somebody to walk us through this policy that's on the agenda tonight?
I guess I will be.
Okay.
Any questions? Have I missed anything? That seems unlikely. All right. Let's move then to the special education update.
You guys are gonna be really sick of
last time, so you're like, oh my God, she's coming again.
We love you. You do such interesting things when you.
Hopefully you'll be sick of me and I won't have to come back for a couple months,
Is
right?
that a hint for?
Tell us
Alright.
more interesting.
Okay, so I'm going to do a little presentation on what we called the Integrated Comprehensive Service Delivery. So I really want to focus on the goal that the district, we have really looked for this year, and that's to create conditions today for every student, emphasize every student, to thrive academically, socially, and emotionally for unlimited opportunities in their future. So I just want to always call attention to what our goal as a district is working towards. So my targets tonight are to provide a history of inclusive practices in Stoughton. And again, I've learned a lot. I'm just starting my third year, so I've learned a lot about the journey so far. There's a video linked to this presentation, but it takes like 11 minutes and sometimes the sound is kind of hard to hear. So I'll let you guys watch that on your own about the journey. I'll walk you, I love YouTube, so I found a great little brief video to walk you through the law, federal law. So that's the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or you'll hear us say IDEA. So, and then processes established over the last 2 years, and provide you an overview of next steps for inclusive practices. Okay, so the timeline. So in 1999, in this district, there were rooms, quote, for students with disabilities, and they did not frequently attend their home school. There were 30 pull-out classes at the high school taught by special education teachers. They did not use student first language, and that's when I say things like, they would say an autistic student or a learning disabled student. We were using student first, so it'd be a student with autism, a student with a cognitive disability. So we always want to put students before their disability. Students were only included or mainstreamed, that was the term, during lunch, circle time, music, art. Students with learning difficulties were not taught by content area teachers, so when it was time for math and reading, they went to their own resource rooms and were taught reading and math in a separate environment. There wasn't shared ownership for learning. And like I said, we had rooms for kids with intellectual impairments, kids with emotional behavioral disabilities, so it was all very separate. So in 2003, DPI identified Stoughton for focus monitoring, and DPI will come into school districts when they see some disproportionality. And at that time, we were identifying 22% of our population students with disabilities, when the national average was 9%. So you can see that was a little disproportionate. So in 2004, we established building service delivery teams, and they created some action steps moving forward. So first of all, they determined there would be no more special education rooms, and students were returned to their neighborhood schools to learn with their peers. And actually, our early childhood learning strat team were the first to really move forwards into their natural setting, which continues. That's why we have, they are all providing services either in the home or the child care or preschool right now. So in 2010, after all that has occurred, the data showed that our identification of students with disabilities was at the national level at 9%. And teachers reported that even though that shift was hard for a lot of classrooms, the classrooms became communities for all students. One quote that you'll hear from the slides are, "Our students became our best teachers." Students who were used to being relegated to a classroom on their own were now invited to sleepovers and birthday parties for the very first time. Our identification rate equaled national average of 9%, and our overall graduation significantly increased, as well as our graduation rate for students with disabilities. So that's kind of the timeline. So how did we get there? What you've missed is beginning in about 2007, there was a focus on improving instruction and building capacity in the general education classroom for all students. Educators, there was PD that was focused on improving that instruction, so they received professional development for differentiation, essential learning targets, the workshop model, using data to guide instruction, use of summative informative assessments, and analysis of student work. Beginning in 2016 and through 2018, the district continued to work on mental health, social emotional learning, personalized learning, or increased use of technology in the classroom. Universal design for learning, which is designing to the edges. So it's providing different ways that children can get the information that they need, different ways that they can show how much what they've learned, and a different way that they can engage in the classroom. Also more opportunities for co-teaching and co-planning. Focused SLOs and PPGs, and the SLOs are those student learning objectives that teachers have, and PPGs is that professional practice goals. So we've also, again, you'll see how it all just really intertwined, that increase of social emotional support through responsive classrooms, restorative practice, culturally responsive practice, some of those things that we talked about last time I was here, nurtured heart approach. So all of those tie into supporting all students. So that's kind of the journey that we've been on. I'm just gonna show this little YouTube video it just gives you a brief overview on what IDEA means for at the federal level, what our responsibility is. That was just a brief overview, just giving you the basics of what our legal responsibility is when it comes to special education. So what does that mean for us? So we are required to provide education for all students in the least restrictive environment, but also providing a continuum of supports. That is where the IEP process supports and guides us. So we've provided professional development beginning 2 years ago for our learning strategists regarding the college and career ready IEP process, which DPI introduced probably about 3 or 4 years ago. And it really focuses on 5 key beliefs that are really a strong part of the journey you heard Stoughton was involved in way before DPI created this process. So the 5 beliefs are high expectations, culturally responsive practices, student relationships, family and community engagement, and that collective responsibility for student learning. So the IEP process helps the newest part of the special education process or the IEP process is it helps really fine-tune the effects of the disability and creates really specific disability-related needs when you discuss what those grade level expectations are, and then talk about the student's strengths and difficulties the student is having in meeting some of the grade level expectations. We continue to refine our special education processes. We've redefined the referral process, the evaluation and IEP processes, and all, I've created little folders for all of our special education staff to really guide them through that process, the timelines, et cetera, that are required. So in reference to the 5 beliefs, this graphic really depicts the intersections of practice to support learners, staff, and families. And again, it's all of our learners and not just our students with disabilities. So we have begun supports with that one-to-one Chromebook environment, continued growth in coherent instruction across elementary buildings, this year's using the Lucy Calkins Readers and Writers Workshop and Math Expressions curriculum. There's a focus on mental health with the practices of trauma-informed care, continuous improvement of the co-planning process, as well as opportunities for co-teaching to occur. Our goal is really to support teachers in building capacity to teach to all learners using the expertise of all the staff that we have. We have such a variety of expertise, and we just want to continue to use that to grow everyone's expertise to teach. So, as we reflected last year, Stoughton has the belief that all students can be successful, so we're continuing our journey in inclusive practices. We do need to provide the least restrictive environment for students, providing individualized instruction with the intent to always move our students into that general education classroom. So what are our next steps? So again, it's that focus on the goal to create those conditions for every student to thrive. We'll have continued focus on college and career-ready IEP process. It helps to drive instruction and collect data for our students with special needs. We will continue with the PPG focus on compassionate schools, growth in school-based mental health support for students, staff, and families. We're going to have increased focus on co-planning and collaboration to really design that instruction to the edges. We have continued movement to that student-centered learning with the use of one-to-one technology. And again, that one-to-one technology can incorporate assistive technology, which are supplementary supports for our students in the classroom, such as text readers, word prediction, things like that. So it really provides those supplementary aids and services for our students with disabilities. And then professional development to support all of our learners will continue. Helps to teach skills like problem solving, critical thinking, collaboration, adaptability, flexibility, and time management. So those are our next steps. And any questions? Yeah.
First of all, Kelly, thank you very much for giving us this presentation. I've been wanting to see this presentation for a while, and I think we are largely doing a tremendous job when it comes to students with special needs. One of the things that doesn't come across in this presentation, though, and you don't really realize it unless you have a child with an IEP, is sort of the amazing people who become part of that team. Can you talk about sort of who some of those people are and what their roles are?
Well, it's really that team approach. So, and it all will depend on the student with a disability and the needs that they have. So it incorporates our learning strategists, which are really key for helping plan that instruction and help support the student in the classroom. We have educational assistants who are also supporting the students. We have speech and language pathologists, occupational therapists, physical therapists. So there's and our general ed teachers who are really designing that instruction to meet a variety of student needs. So, I mean, they're all working together to create these plans. And the parents.
Yeah, and they're all doing it in a way that's sort of incredibly nimble, because the needs change throughout the year, and there are meetings that nobody else sees or knows about, and the plan changes, and everybody makes it happen.
Right.
I would
And there's
like
a
to
lot of
acknowledge those folks.
there's a lot of collaboration within those meetings to really design that instruction, and a lot of expertise around that student. So, and they're always coming back and collecting data to say, what are we going to do next?
Yeah, it's a lot of work, and
It is.
it's really good work, so thank you.
Thank you.
Allison?
Could you explain the Lucy Calkins readers? We talked about that tonight in finance. I don't know what they are.
Actually, I think somebody else could probably talk about, do you want to, can I?
Yep.
Sure.
Yeah, it's just a really, and actually, I think Lucy Calkins is a really nice way, it uses a variety of methods to teach a variety of learners, so it really incorporates a lot of universal design strategies. So I think it's very helpful and individualized for kids. And maybe you can give a...
Yeah, absolutely, thank you. And such an important noticing around the benefit and the value of our teams of educators working together to support students with disabilities. I'm a family member and a guardian of my brother who has very significant autism, and he has benefited so tremendously from the educators, the professionals, and support staff in his life. And that's so true here in Stoughton. It's, I think, really one of the reasons why it's such a district of choice for so many. With regard to your question about Teachers College, the units of study, they're really an ideal choice for very diverse learners in the classroom. And I say that because students are really allowed to pursue reading. That's at their own level. So students have opportunities to read at their own level and also just beyond. So they can they're always having that opportunity to stretch. So there isn't just sort of one reader that all students are experiencing. And they also have those opportunities that our team spoke to so eloquently a couple weeks ago about the whole concept of conferring, where a teacher is working in small groups or perhaps even individually with students to really address very targeted skills that might look quite different. My child, compared perhaps to Kelly's, what they each might need might be really different, even though they're both in second grade. And so for that reason, the curriculum is really sort of porous and flexible, but at the same time is standards aligned. So you're always keeping within standards-based and standards-aligned instruction, which is really important. So it's always like on level, but always also striving as well.
And it provides opportunity to even provide that specialized instruction right in the classroom during that readers or writers block, because kids are moving all over. It's not a teacher standing in front or all the class doing the same thing. So it really allows that huge flexibility for our learners.
It's hard for me to wrap my brain around when I think what a reader was when I was in elementary school, which was a very long time ago. And reader was a very different thing, so they just sound
right. It's like
the
Dick and Jane
incredible
series, right?
Yes.
Spot runner.
There was that.
That's what I did. So I'm aging myself on that one, I think. But.
Yeah. No, I'm there. I know that work. Yeah, absolutely. So there isn't the expectation that students are sort of staying in lockstep, or that all students in a given class need the exact same thing because everybody's 9. We know that all students, there are some sort of very universal needs that we are meeting within the context of this really quite heterogeneous set of students that we have in any of our classrooms.
Yeah, and it supports even, I mean, our kids that are gifted, our English language learners, all that. So this type of work is not only for our kids with disabilities, but for all of our kids.
Thank you.
I'm not sure if this, or if my question is most appropriate for you, Kelly, or for Tim, or for Erica, but in the Finance Committee meeting earlier today, Erica showed us that we have, or she showed us a portion of our budget that was broken into instruction and support services. And in going through the presentation here and getting us up to speed on inclusion and on the requirements that we have, but also the goals that we set for ourselves, I'm wondering what kind of or are the goals that are listed up in here things that we have to like specifically budget for, or is how much, since we're talking about inclusion, how much of that is broken into our standard instruction budget and how much goes into the support services? And I'm only asking to better understand myself.
It's a combination. So as we talked at finance, our support services, so our school psychs, our counselors, our social workers, etc., staff in those areas, their salary and benefits are designated and they are paid for out of that support services chunk of the budget. But a lot of the instructional material, some of it comes from Fund 27, which is the special education fund, some comes from Fund 10. A lot of the practices that Kelly talks about are great practices for all kids. So it's not just we are working with a student who happens to have a disability with this. These are programs that we're working with all kids. How do we make sure that all students are college and career ready? How do we make sure that all students are prepared for the workforce? And so it's real hard to delineate it's coming from one budget or the other. It's across multiple budgets that we are meeting the needs of all of our students.
I mean, and then there's the federal money. We do get federal flow-through funds, which in part it pays for some of the salaries of some of our learning strategists, but then it also covers things like professional development that we offer, materials that we're using, maybe seating that kids that have some physical disabilities need. So, there's different funds. I mean, but just some of those federal funds have a little more restrictions on what you can spend that money on.
And as you just mentioned there, Tim, you mentioned the overarching goal of inclusion being teaching all students equally, or teaching or considering all students, or trying to I don't have the right words for this. Kelly?
Providing access to all
Thank
students for those educational opportunities.
Yeah, so I kind of assumed that that we would see less delineation in our budget, so I guess that's kind of what I was asking. So thank you
Some
for
of
that.
it is, and Erica can speak to some of the delineation probably a lot better than I can.
The biggest delineation we have, like you talked about instruction and support, health services is another one that falls into support, but I think the biggest delineation we have is kind of between Fund 10 and Fund 27, and certain costs that are categorized as special education costs. And it's very interesting because as I've learned and kind of gone through this journey with the district on how we think about all kids, it's a little bit frustrating sometimes to know that funding sources and some of the laws around special education are a little bit outdated in their thinking. And so there are ways that we have to classify costs when we do our record keeping to ensure that we get those resources from, both flow through, like Kelly was talking about, but then our special education aid from the state. And sometimes the way we have to track that information can be a little bit challenging, because we really do want to get to a point where we just talk about all kids. But we do have to, the state and federal government do dictate certain ways that we do our record keeping to ensure that we are meeting their criteria in which they use to provide some of the resources to us. So that's really the main reason why we do kind of separate out regular ed and special ed from a financial perspective. It's really based on what we're required to do to get those resources. Does that make sense?
Yeah, are any of those requirements to get access to the resources tied to, for instance, the numbers that you showed very early in the presentation where Stoughton at the time had 22% of its students classified as having a disability versus an average of 9% and I may have worded that incorrectly. So I apologize for that if I did, but is it based on any metrics like that, or is it based on how we ourselves are allocating resources?
So I would say that if I'm understanding your question correctly, when I look at historically, if we go back to when we had 22% of our students identified, and we were staffing at a level to provide the supports that were identified as in their IEPs, we did have more staff classified as special education at that point in time. So when you look at a system like our special ed aid that we get from the state is really based, it's a reimbursement of prior year costs. So when you have more costs designated as special ed, your reimbursement the following year is higher. So with a reduction in those costs over time, that has resulted in a reduction in reimbursement for those services. But again, I think we were at a point back then where we were probably over-identifying, spending more, and really not educating kids to get the best results and provide the best education for them. So,
And it's you get reimbursed for the number of students basically that you have that are identified.
That you've identified.
So, but they'll watch what your percentages are. And like you saw, DPI had kind of talked to us through that focus monitoring. They're not going to say because you have 22%. But, so it's not, I don't think, based on the percentage per se.
Yeah,
but they'll watch you to make sure that all of a sudden you're not saying 50% of your kids have to get more money. You know what I mean? They want to watch that. And it's not good for kids, really.
Yeah, I just want to clarify too. The special ed aid isn't based on the number of kids we have. It's really based on what we spend for eligible expenses. So things like salary and benefits. It's primarily salary and benefits for those providing those services.
Thank you.
Steve, want to go that side of the room? No, I like getting the side down first.
Kelly, thanks again for sharing the information. You mentioned part of the journey was looking at data to drive instruction. And so when I just want to make sure I understand what you meant by that, because I guess what I was thinking is just like we do all the time, right? We look at data to drive instruction. So, but are there different data that we look at to better understand students with disabilities?
Right. Well, what staff do is they take data, and that's called the present level of academic and functional performance, and it's specific data. And then what they do is based on that data, they write IEP goals. And then they have to take specific data to say whether those students are meeting their goals or not. And if they're not meeting that goal, you have to change it so they can. And that's that whole new IEP process. But you should always be gathering data on what you're working on, because each of those students have goals, and then with those goals, they have services attached to them.
Okay, so it could be reading.
Yep.
It could be related to a specific educational area, like reading, for example.
Yeah, and it's really all tied to what now the teams are really focusing on is those disability-related needs. Okay. So based on the impact of that disability, what are the needs, and then what are the goals? Okay. And they have to be written very attainable, objective, so you can measure it.
Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to mention to Steve's point that when we're talking about IEP goals, they're very real substantial goals. And they're dignified, you know, if they can't meet them, adjustments are made, but it's not like what it was when we were kids and it was like, well, they can't learn. It's not that at all. I mean, they set these goals, they're rigorous, and there's monitoring. I just wanted to throw that out there.
And that's all part of that belief system of high expectations.
Yeah, I mean, it's tremendously better than it was when I was a kid. It's unbelievably better. It really is.
Kathleen?
Just taking on what Joe just said, for people that haven't had kids with IEPs, the goals that are set aren't necessarily, John will spell correctly 75% of the time, though that might be a goal, but there are also things like that student will advocate for themselves and learn to speak up for what they need, so it's not just the teacher kind of keeping an eye on that, the child is encouraged to say, I'm overwhelmed, or I need a timeout, whatever it is related to their specific thing. And what I intended to say was, my first child with an IEP entered public education in 1988, and I've had somebody in school with an IEP continually since then, and the difference is unbelievable. From a focus on what color each sheet of the IEP used to be, right? Every year it'd be a new color, and that was important to keep the colors, and it just felt like a bunch of busy work. And now, I mean, I just can't say enough about that real focus on what that individual student needs, and kind of reviewing where they've been. So I'm thrilled with what's going on.
Good. Yeah, I really emphasize, I think sometimes it's hard because there's so many legal obligations, legal paperwork, that I think years ago we used to get really tied up in it's just paperwork, where I really stress it's really a plan.
Yeah.
And it needs to be changed when a student is making progress, or it needs to be changed when they are making significant progress. So I call it an action plan, a work in progress, and that's what we really need to focus on.
Thank you again for coming and speaking with us tonight. I wonder if you could talk in a little bit of detail, not a lot, but a little bit of detail about how the curriculum is set up to support different learning styles. For instance, if you had a student with dyslexia, are there parts of the curriculum that dictate this would be an option, a way that you could teach the curriculum, or is that part of the collaboration between the team?
Right. Well, I hate to call it curriculum because I really call it specialized instruction, and it needs to match the disability-related needs. So either pulling on a variety of resources in order to teach a student. So there are, if I could say, there are different ways to teach a student with, let's say, dyslexia. We have something called the Sunday system, which is very like an Orton Gillingham. It's really teaching phonics and sounds. We have things like, there's Edmark that's teaching sight words. So there's different ways to teach students depending on what their area of weakness is. So it's all about identifying those things instead of a set curriculum. When we're looking at curriculum in the general ed classroom, there's different ways we can provide students different ways to access that. Different ways, different opportunities to learn. So it's kind of different. Specialized instruction is more this really specialized way to teach kids depending on what areas of need they have. I don't know if that really makes much sense.
Well, I was going to say, that's part of what the accommodations are for. So I have a student that, they don't really call it dyslexia anymore, but that's what she has. And to accommodate her specific issues, they, part of her overall grade might not involve the spelling part, because we know, I mean, she just, yeah. But also things like when they're using their Chromebooks to write, that she can have the spell check turned on to help her write more, to focus more on being able to write and less on what she's doing wrong with that part. So I think each student kind of gets accommodations based on that, and also based on how old they are, because you know, we have a lot of great tools when kids are really young, but sometimes those tools don't work, and that's where that constant adjustment comes in, you know, from one year to the next.
And that's all about access to that general ed curriculum. So there's the access to the general ed curriculum, and then there's the specialized instruction to help teach the skills they need to keep moving forward.
I guess I would just say that I'm asking it from the perspective of parents who are concerned that their child at one school has different tools available to them and different teams available to them than a child at another elementary school in our district. And so I'm wondering if there is more of a centralized way that the tools and the curriculum or the instructional supports can be relayed through all the elementary schools.
Right. Well, it should be continuous throughout, and that's establishing that IEP process that looks the same whether you're at Kikanza, whether you're at Fox Prairie, whether you're at River Bluff. So it's that continuous, and then providing everyone the professional development. So everyone's been trained in, let's say, the Sunday system, and they all have access to the same material, specialized instruction. Everyone has access across the district to things like, we have text readers, word prediction, spell checks. Everyone has access across the system to do that. So it's having those discussions with staff and keep building their capacity to know this is what's available and walking through. But everything is available across the district.
I would just note that there's a perception that it's not.
Okay. Yeah, that shouldn't be the perception.
Well, then I guess
If I would be honest, but.
I don't think it should be either, but.
Right.
Then I guess we need to sort of identify that perception and own it and start
Absolutely.
figuring out,
Yeah.
you know, how we're going to address it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, speaking for my family, our experiences with IEPs have been very positive, and particularly in the ones that always concerned us were transitions between schools.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really nice to, you know, have the kids show up at River Bluff and, you know, have the staff there say, yeah, we know you. We've talked to the people who know you from your previous school. We get you. We understand what your deal is and what you need, and just have it, I mean, not seamless, but, you know, as close as it's ever
Right.
going to get.
And we're really working on that.
Oh, it shows.
Good.
Good. Anything else anybody wants to raise? I'm going to take that as a no. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you, Kelly.
Before we change our minds.
I'm out of here.
Next on the agenda is policy number 1024.00, the proposed policy on video surveillance and electronic monitoring. This is a first reading. This is also the first test of the Neola Policy Service. And Dr. Onsager, are you going to present this?
Yep, I'll walk the board through it. And we're still working on the administrative guidelines. That's something we're working through in conjunction with this. And so depending on number of questions or comments from the board, you may see this again next meeting or maybe 2 from now, depending if policy committee needs to review it. But the policy committee went through this, and we wanted to start with this one so that it's up and running before our cameras get online. They're not online yet. We're still working with the company and the training and everything else, but we wanted to get this in place before we're up and running. So if you walk through this policy, the second paragraph of the policy talks about where they're going to be placed. They're going to be placed in the common areas, meaning hallways, the cafeteria, the library, the gyms, etc. It also talks about that they're not going to be placed in locker rooms. They're not going to be placed in restrooms, etc. The very last sentence of that paragraph is something that the policy committee tweaked a little bit from the Neola suggestion, and it basically says nothing in the policy prevents law enforcement from from following their own policies and regulations. The Stoughton PD does not have body cameras right now. But if they did get that, we did not want to have to go back and rewrite the policy to permit them to wear their body cameras if they're walking through the school. We are assuming and know that if they do have body cameras, the Stoughton Police Department will have their own policies and regulations regarding the use and where they can be worn, etc. So we will refer to that. The fourth paragraph of this policy talks about making sure that once we get them up and running, we have signs. We're letting people know that there are cameras. We're letting them know that they will be on tape. We currently have cameras in our buses, so this will allow us, or this will require us to take a look at possibly having a little sticker on the bus window just saying, you know, there is a camera on board, etc. The next paragraph or so says how it's going to be used. It's going to be used to support the operation of the school district, but there's also a statement in there that says the district will not use the video cameras for the purpose of routine staff appraisals, meaning we're not going to use it to do the yearly evaluation of a staff member based on, you know, this is how we see you teaching or interacting, etc. The sentence that begins with recording of students will be treated confidential talks about the students' rights and their privacy rights under FERPA, and primarily students that may be in the camera view, but they also have rights, so that we're not just going to release the footage, etc., to anybody. There are protections for our students and staff for their privacy protection. There is a paragraph that talks about how long that we keep our videos. Our video recording will be kept 14 days. So unless there is a request made within 7 days, and we pick the number 7 because that will allow us, let's say it comes 7 days, happens to be on a Friday or right before break. That gives us 7 more days to pull this footage before it's automatically lost from the system. And so if there is an incident that we have to pull the footage, this will allow us to pull the footage and archive it and save it for, you know, a year or more if we need it, depending on what the situation is. And then it talks about, you know, later on that we're going to be, this does not cover instances where we're going to be recording sporting events, plays, musicals, etc., because we do that now. We have our gym, for example, has a system called Eye in the Sky that tapes all the games that are in the gym, and families remotely can watch it. So grandma and grandpa, who let's say are in Maine, can log in and watch the game happening in the gym. So this policy does not prevent us from doing that. And then it talks about administrative guidelines that we will develop, and our goal is to have the administrative guidelines attached to this for the next reading.
Thank you. Alice?
So one question I guess I had, I mean, I thought it looked pretty nice, but I was looking at the second paragraph that, about midway through, that it says except in extraordinary circumstances and with the written authorization of the district administrator, video surveillance equipment shall not be used in areas where persons have a reasonable expectation of privacy. What would those extraordinary circumstances be? I just was a little uncomfortable with that.
Right, and we talked about that as a policy committee, and those of you on the policy committee help me out here in different things we talked about. Because we did talk about that, because, you know, we want to protect people's privacies, but it didn't prevent us from if there was an extraordinary circumstances, something legal, et cetera, I think is what we talked about.
Would that be delineated in the guidelines?
Yeah, I mean, the guidelines will talk about some of that as well.
So it'll get referenced somewhere.
Yeah, and if I remember the discussion right, there was a concern, first of all, that these truly be extraordinary circumstances and not, we don't want to put cameras in restrooms. We don't want to put cameras in locker rooms. We don't want to put cameras in people's private offices or changing areas or places like that. At the same time, we recognize that we were not able to identify all the situations where we might all of a sudden really say, oh my God, we need a camera in this person's office for some reason. So the way this is drafted, I think one of Neola's options was to require board approval on something like that. The problem we identified with that was that that would have to be done in open session, and if it's, some sort of law enforcement investigation, for example, it would be difficult to, in a public meeting, authorize the placement of a camera for the purpose of a surveillance operation.
It could also be time sensitive.
Yeah, I would think, that as well.
But it would have to be something truly extraordinary to even be considered for it, because I can tell you, and I also, when we were talking as a policy committee, I think I raised that I had concerns about, anywhere in that, and the more we talk, the more this gives us the leeway. If there is something that truly has to come up that we have to put it in there, we have that option, but it's got to be truly something that really, really warrants that, we feel like it.
I mean, would there be some limitation then? I mean, it seems that there would have to be some legal standard too that, I mean, I don't know, I mean,
yes.
Most of us are not lawyers, but.
I'm not that kind of lawyer.
Right,
So.
I would think that if it wasn't truly extraordinary, that
Yes.
there'd be some desperate legal ramifications.
Yes, we recognize that there's very serious privacy concerns with this, and as I recall the discussion and policy, I think we were not able to identify any particular situation where it was, if this happens, we might need to do this.
Right.
But it was also something that we didn't want to rule out entirely in case something truly extraordinary did come up. And my assumption would be that a prudent district administrator, before granting written authorization for this, would consult with legal counsel.
That's what I was going to say.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
Right?
Oh, yes.
All right.
Yes.
No,
A prudent district administrator is not going to stick his or her neck out.
yeah.
Joe, did you have a question or a comment?
Sort of both. I think it's a really comprehensive policy, and I'm wondering if some of that is Neola, because, they've thought of just pretty much every eventuality in this policy. And I think that's really important for this particular policy and probably a lot of other policies. So is that something we got our money's worth and are going to continue to do so from using Neola, or?
I believe so, and when we looked at comparing what this says to what our current policy is, I think everything that's in our current policy is also in this. It's worded a little differently, and then more. And so this gives us a broader, deeper depth to a lot of these things. In starting to go through the policy, that's something that we're going to be doing over the next year, is taking our current policy, taking Neola policies and doing that bird walk and how they match, and looking to see if what we have is currently addresses in Neola, and if it's not, it's a discussion on, do we want it into a Neola policy, or is this something that's outdated? So for example, I looked at one Neola policy today that had in there pagers, Well, in our old policy, we had pagers too. Okay, 10, 15 years ago, they maybe were, they're not now.
Did it say anything about tin cans and
No, not yet. Smoke, you know, and different things, yelling across the hallway and things like that. But it, you know, so there are some things that are old. There are some things that are no longer relevant to what we do. And so I think Neola is going to give us a big, broad depth of what we're doing. What I also like about Neola is their twice-a-year update. So they will give us an update twice a year, which will say these 12 or 14 policies may have, or we suggest changes to them, and then we can do that. We were going through a policy today on elections and the filing deadlines for incumbents and non-incumbents statutory, and Jenny McKenna, who is kind of our expert in this district right now on that, was suggesting things that Scott Brown is actually going to take to the rest of the Neola group, because he likes how she was explaining it and wording it better and adding words that they didn't think of. So there's also that standpoint where if there are things that we're adding or things that we say this makes more sense, we have the potential of affecting every district that's using Neola for it, and vice versa.
So I have one more question. The last sentence says that annually, basically you'll give the board a
Correct.
report about this.
Correct. How it's working.
Right, what time of year is going to be appropriate for that, do you think?
I was probably thinking June-ish at the end of the school year.
Okay. Sounds good to me.
Steve, did you have a question?
Yeah, well, and these are maybe just diving into the weeds a little bit on a few things. I feel like the issue of the police in paragraph 2 about recognizing the law enforcement, they may have their own equipment, should be separated out from the district's responsibilities and video surveillance activities.
Let me see if I understand that. So that last sentence that begins, the board recognizes that nothing, you're suggesting breaking that out?
Just breaking that out, just because it is separate from ours. And I think it's important that we make it clear that it's the police or law enforcement, their equipment, not, because as I read it, I was like, well, they could do anything, if their policy says so, they could do anything they want with our video surveillance and electronic monitoring.
So, could they?
I assumed that that's what that said. But
no,
we were talking, when Tim explained it, it's their own.
Right, it's their own body camera. One of the things that I'm working on the administrative guidelines is that relationship. Our system will allow, because of security purposes, if there is an incident in a building, our security system will allow a squad car pulling up to our building to access our cameras to see that. But as the chief and I are talking, there has to be some strict guidelines into when they can do that and when they can't.
Right.
And so that's what we're working on in the administrative guidelines part of that, and making sure the police are aligned with. So the chief is very adamant that anytime the cameras are accessed by law enforcement, there has to be an incident report. And that incident report is then designated by him, etc. So we're working on that.
Okay.
But I mean, we could add their own equipment.
I think that's important, because if they have video, if they're wearing body cameras and they come in and they're doing their law enforcement duty, they might be recording. And I thought that's what that was about.
That was part of the discussion too.
Right.
That was, you know, right now Stoughton Police don't have them, but if they do, they're beholden to their policy. So, you know, that's what I think Tim's working out with the,
It's
the
twofold, it
administrative.
sounds like.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then there seems to be opportunities to cross-reference other policies, like, for example, paragraph 3, which refers to disciplinary action. They may be subject to disciplinary action per our policy. That, I think it may be helpful to think about putting that cross-reference in there.
I think the only response I'd make to that, Steve, I think that's a good idea, is that as we're going through and sort of renumbering and rewriting everything.
I know.
That's a real tangled ball of string at this point.
But I see there's opportunities in here to just to at least have that discussion with the policy committee as these Neola templates are used. How do we integrate, cross-referencing? Because I was thinking the same thing about the number of days to request a review of a recording. Should probably align with our complaint policy. That was it for me.
Yeah,
Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody over here, anything else? Burke, you've been awful quiet. You got anything to say about this? So you're fine with all your fellow students being surveilled?
I'm good at that.
Really don't have anything you want to say?
All right then.
But for clarity, I mean, if, say there's an incident, the police will have access to this footage, yes? I mean, they can't point the cameras where they want, but they can look at the footage.
It depends.
Depends on what the
So
incident is.
it depends on what the incident is, and if it's an internal matter, if we involve the SRO.
Okay, but if you do,
Correct.
this policy allows for that.
Correct.
That's what I
Correct.
thought. Okay.
But,
Just wanted to be
but
clear.
just because there's an incident happens doesn't necessarily mean that we involve the SRO or the police every time.
Other questions, gentlemen? Anything else?
No.
More for Burke, I mean, have you had, heard comments from other students about this?
Not really. I just know they're all like, oh, there's cameras in the building now. And they'll be like, I think it's a good thing though, because there's no more of the he said, she said kind of thing. You can go look and see what's wrong or what happened. And I like it. I think it's a good thing.
Okay.
And not talk too loud or something?
So, as I do, I'm imagining scenarios related to this policy. Let's say that we have an incident and, the footage kind of isn't necessarily clear in terms of who's to blame or who's at fault. And we get, say, a parent involved and they want to take it to the police and have them look at the footage and make a determination. What do we do then?
Well, first of all, it depends when they make the request. If that request is 14 days later, we don't have the footage
Say it's within
anymore.
a window.
Right. There is going to be times where the SRO would make a determination that this doesn't rise to that. This does not rise to the occasion. We can always have the SRO view it and make a determination of if it goes to the next level or not. If the police want the video, they have to make a formal request to us for it.
Okay, that's exactly the answer that I was hoping for.
It's not a carte blanche that they get it.
Because I just couldn't imagine a scenario where the police are requesting access to this footage, and I want to know.
In every district that I've been that have video cameras, usually, if that happens, it's a rarity than the common practice.
I assume that it would be because my brain starts to roll about.
Yep.
What about this? What about this? So
Yes,
it's a big change for us.
Did you have something?
I did. Is the 14-day part, is that the usual period of time?
It's I mean it's the longer you store it, the more servers you need. Most in the last district that I was in was 14 days. It looped every 14 days, just because the assumption was if we hadn't pulled it in 14 days, we're not going to go back 2 months later And occasionally you have an incident where you find out, well, it happened 3 months earlier. We're sorry, we don't have any video for that. That's a risk we take, but we can't keep everything forever.
Just wanted to point out there's a typographic.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay, so if a student gets something stolen from them, will they be able to see the footage of who stole it and when it happened if they request it?
If that last paragraph also says that the other students on there have their rights to privacy.
Right, yeah.
So if you get something stolen, so let's say something is stolen out of my locker, what will probably happen is administration will look at the video.
Not the kid though.
Right.
Okay.
And say, this is, you know, we see so-and-so going into your locker. And that starts their investigation.
Good question.
And one other thought. I'm pulling a Joe Fry.
There's only one
Let's
Joe
don't
Fry.
name it.
There's room for
I'm
only
Joe
one,
Fry,
Steve.
right?
John's already wearing a ball cap, so.
Do we lose control of the video when law enforcement has access to it? In other words, is the confidentiality compromised if, I mean, I don't know what happens to the actual video stream. Do they end up recording it on their computer? I mean, how do we manage control of it?
I would think in order to get, and Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, in order to get a copy of the video, they're not making the copy. Our tech department is the ones making the copy. So law enforcement is not pulling off their own copy. We're making the copy.
Okay. And then they have to, like, how do we manage it so that we know that they get a copy, but at some point, is it destroyed? I mean,
that goes into if it's illegal, and I don't know, to be honest, I don't know the evidence chain and how long they have to keep, and how long they keep evidence.
It depends on what they do with it. I mean, if it results in a criminal conviction, they're gonna have to keep that for some time.
Okay.
Yeah.
But then, how does the police manage confidentiality? Is there something showing students there? And what happened after it comes out of school, it goes to the police? What happened with the confidentiality of the students?
Well, I think part of that goes to what we provide to the police. I mean, I think there was discussion at the meeting, if I remember right, of whether we needed to blur images of non-involved students before they were provided.
Right. And we
to
can
law
do that.
enforcement. Yeah.
Can you repeat that? I didn't get
We
that.
could, we could, if there's a group of students and we're focusing on 2 students, we could, what we release, blur the faces of everybody else but those 2 students.
So those other kids aren't identifiable.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, but then what happened to this hypothetical 2 students? Confidentiality for...
I would assume that if the police are doing a legal investigation and they're dealing with these 2 students, there are process, procedures, and laws about the confidentiality that they have to meet. That they can't just be posting this on YouTube.
Right, that's what I was gonna say, it's not gonna show up on the
And so I
Facebook
think that
page.
they have their own policies, procedures, laws that they have to adhere to for the confidentiality of the victim, the perpetrator, etc.
And especially minors.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Well, we don't have any control over it.
Yeah.
It's a legal matter.
Yeah, once it goes to law enforcement.
I didn't think of that. A question that came in my head as we were talking about the 7-day reporting, which we'll make sure all students are aware of, and we talked about weekends and stuff. Hypothetically, if on Friday before one of our long breaks, an incident occurs, how will they be able to meet that 7-day reporting. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, so if
Hopefully
it-
that'll never
if-
happen,
If
but,
it
yeah.
happens the day before winter break,
Yeah,
they're gonna need to report it to us within those 7 days. And most of the time during winter break, there are people working in the district.
oh, okay.
So, other than the actual paid holidays, so even during winter break, usually there are people here other than the paid holidays. So there's a way to get a hold of the somebody in the district, and that's why we put the 7 days, because that still gives us a 7-day leeway that we got 7 days to pull it in case it happens to be a weekend, in case it happens to be, et cetera. We have a little more leeway time.
Who is the request made to, or the sort of notification that there's been an event that needs to be looked into? Is there a chain of people that can?
It's the first access point would be the building principal.
And we had, in policy, I know we had taken a real hard look at the complaint policy and started tearing it up.
Right.
And I think that might be something we want to just go to Neola's recommendations on a pretty short order, because that seems to link very closely to this. Last call. Okay, folks. Sure.
I'm good.
Thanks for chiming in, it's helpful.
Thank you, everybody.
So this was our first reading. This will be back, I think almost certainly on the next agenda for review and approval. That concludes the discussion portion of our meeting. Coming up, we have a regular board meeting on October 8th. We have a facility committee meeting on October 9th. We have the board retreat on October 6th. Do we have a location for that yet?
It's the same place it was last year.
Oh, that's right, it's at Venable. And I will ask if you have not already done so that you read the 2 books on governance before that meeting and come prepared to discuss them. Burke, you are invited to that if you wish to come. If you do not wish to come, I understand the position.
Okay.
We feed you.
Okay.
We will feed you.
As long as it's on Saturday,
It is, yeah, it's a long, boring Saturday meeting.
Please, we'll make it exciting. We have the annual meeting, which we had discussed earlier, and the special meeting with the consent agenda and the tax levy, both on October 22nd. Unless there's any further business before the board, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion by Mr. Fry. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Jackson. All in favor, please so signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Meeting is adjourned.